You gotta hand it to Royal Enfield, they know how to come up with a cool sounding name. Interceptor, Continental GT, Super Meteor, and now this, the shotgun. This is the fourth motorcycle in Royal Enfield's 650cc family, and it gets that same tried, tested and loved 650cc parallel twin. But beyond that, this is a slightly different motorcycle. It doesn't really fall into any set category. You've got the Interceptor, which is a roadster, you've got the cafe racer, you've got the cruiser, but what exactly is this? Royal Enfield tells us that this bike is inspired by the custom bike building scene in the country. And to my eyes, this looks like a long, low, slammed motorcycle with a bit of bobber in its identity. It's based on the Super Meteor 650 platform, but there are some significant differences. At the chassis end, you've got different wheel sizes. The Super Meteor has a large 19-inch front and a small 16-inch rear, which goes with its cruiser proportions. This bike gets an 18-inch front and a 17-inch rear. You move further back, the fuel tank is different. It's smaller, it's a different shape, it's a very good-looking thing. Then you've got this big headlamp surround to give it that mean look. And this is made out of metal. In fact, everything on this bike feels solid, feels heavy, and this is a heavy bike. The Interceptor itself is a heavy motorcycle, about 220 kilos. This, 240. When you look at it, when you feel it, you'll understand why it's a substantial bike. But bear in mind, this is a heavy thing. There are some really nice design details as you move further back as well. I love the floating look of that single seat, but this is not strictly a single-seater motorcycle. If you want, you can have a pillion seat at the back, or if you want, you can remove the pillion seat and use that rack as a luggage mounting point. So there is some versatility in here. Then you have the exhausts. Now, Royal Enfield has gone with a twin pea-shooter setup. The pea-shooter exhaust is a very old-school retro-looking thing, and they usually hug the motorcycle tightly and they come exactly flat down along the side. Here though, the exhaust is slightly kinked upwards, and if you look at it from the back, it spreads outwards like on the Interceptor. I'm not particularly sure if I like that, both in terms of the look and in terms of how wide it makes the bike when you're in traffic. The rear fender is something else I'm not completely sold on. There's quite a large air gap out here. Now I get that the wheel needs space to move, but maybe this could have extended further down. I'm not a genius in terms of design, but there is something visually jarring about that gap to my eyes. Overall though, this is still a really handsome, long, butch, big looking motorcycle, and we will get to this in a bit, but one of the big reasons you'll want to buy this bike is for the way it looks. But it's not just the looks, it's also about how the bike makes you feel, because I think there's some really nice quality details to take in out here. The frame, for example, has a nice metallic finish. It's got a powder coat look and feel. It's something we saw on the Super Meteor earlier. It comes to this bike as well. You don't really see that in many bikes, but the chassis itself looks nicely finished. Then you've got smaller things like these foot peg brackets. Alloy units, very nice looking. Royal Enfield has given the engine a gloss finish for the cases out here, not something they've done before, and it's something I like. Further up here, this is metal like I mentioned. Even the switch cube units are aluminium. These triple clamps here for the fork, they all look really nice and they make you feel like you're on a quality motorcycle. As for the view forward, well, you've got similar clocks that you'll find on the Super Meteor, round unit, digital analog, quite simple, and you've got the little tripper display on the side for navigation if you want to use it through your phone. This is not a TFT display, it's not the same unit from the Himalayan, and it's nowhere close to as advanced. But I get that Royal Enfield is keeping the latest, greatest technology for its most technologically advanced motorcycle, while the Super Meteor with its air and oil cooled engine gets a more old school vibe. For me, the biggest question with this motorcycle is it more comfortable than the Super Meteor 650, and by how much? Now, the Super Meteor is a beautiful looking bike. I think it looks even nicer than this thing. But by the nature of what it is, where you sit very low with your feet forward, it's not a comfortable motorcycle if you have roads around you that are not smooth. That bike is nice on smooth roads, but if you've got bumpy roads with big expansion gaps, lumpy tarmac, it can give your back a beating. This is definitely better. The main reason for that is how you sit on the bike. The Super Meteor's pegs are somewhere out here. On the shotgun, they're mid-set. This foot peg position is similar to what you'll find in a classic or a bullet. Neutral, not at the back, not in front, right down the middle. As for your lower body and your legs, this is nice and comfortable. It's higher, it's about 800 mm, still a low accessible seat height, but definitely higher than the Super Meteor, and you're sitting in a more natural position. So when you hit a pothole, it's not so bad on your back. The handlebar, I'm not so sure about. This does give you a slight lean forward, and while I get that Royal Enfield is giving you that custom bike feel, you do have a bit of a crouch forward, and it doesn't feel entirely natural. I also would like the handlebar to have been a little bit wider. As of now, it's not bad, but if the bar was slightly higher, slightly further back, I think this would be a much more comfortable bike. Nevertheless, we've been spending a few hundred kilometers with this bike, riding it all over the city, outside the city, and it does not feel uncomfortable. The suspension has even less travel than the Super Meteor at the rear. It's 90 mm of travel on the rear shocks, which sounds bad on paper, but again, because of the way you're sitting with the bike, the way you interact with it, it is far more comfortable. And a fun fact is that the Interceptor has even less travel than this, but no one really complains about the Interceptor being a very stiff and uncomfortable bike. And that highlights just how important it is how you sit on a bike. It makes a huge difference. It's not something we really think about. Nevertheless, this bike doesn't feel firm, jarring, even if you hit bad bumps. It's not nasty, but it's not comfortable either. And after a few hours of riding on bad roads, you will feel some soreness in your back. Comfort then, not really a reason to buy a shotgun. One of the big reasons why you would want to buy this bike is this. That 648cc parallel twin motor is a thing of beauty. It's been out for about 5.5 years now, and it's completely proven. This engine, pretty much the same as it is in every other bike, same power and torque figures, similar sort of sound and feel. Not a lot of bottom end torque, but fantastic mid-range, smooth, creamy performance, and it's a quick bike. We tested this bike at about 6.5 seconds from 0 to 100, which makes it about 0.4 seconds quicker than the Super Meteor and about on par with the Interceptor and the Continental GT. It's also a very nice sounding bike, slightly different but very familiar. Here's what it sounds like. It's a sound you'll never get tired of when you're riding. It's not particularly loud, but it's loud enough, and you'll always enjoy listening to that engine. As for fuel efficiency, it weighs pretty much identical to the Super Meteor, so you can expect similar numbers between 22 kpl and 30 kpl, depending on how gentle you are with the throttle. As for handling, it's a fun motorcycle. The overarching theme here is that this is a big, solid thing. Cruising down the highway, it feels really planted. The handling itself is quite nice. The wheel sizes have improved things and the bike feels responsive. But these foot pegs hit the tarmac really easily, probably quicker than you would on a classic or a bullet. So you're not going to be hitting high lean angles. You will be scraping them quite often if you tend to do that. So the idea here is to go more with the flow of things and enjoy that engine. Braking is pretty good too. You've got a 320 mm disc at the front and a massive 300 mm rotor at the rear. That brake is really powerful, and if you put too much effort into the lever, you will run into ABS quite quickly. But together, the bike slows down quite nicely. As for life in the city, this is pretty much like every other 650cc Royal Enfield. If you live in a big city with huge traffic jams, something you get stuck in every day, not the most comfortable of bikes. It can get a bit cumbersome. Like with the Interceptor, you've got to manage the width of the pipes and the overall length of the motorcycle. But I also noticed that these foot pegs can get in the way if you're trying to squeeze through tight gaps, either against traffic or even against the footpath. So this is not a motorcycle that you will fit through every gap, and sometimes you just have to sit there and be a little patient. Clutch is also a little on the heavy side, not too bad. There is a little bit of engine heat. These are all familiar things with the rest of the 650cc family. And like those bikes, you can commute on this motorcycle, but it's not the ideal commuter. Royal Enfield hasn't given us the price as of shooting this today, but I suspect it will be positioned close to the Super Meteor, maybe a little bit lower, but that is on the high side because the Super Meteor is the most expensive Royal Enfield on sale today. So with that, let's try and draw out a conclusion here and figure out what this bike is about and who it's for. I think it stands for style. It's a wonderful looking thing. It has a very nice engine and it's a nice bike to ride in a sedate manner. It is a fairly comfortable bike, definitely more so than the Super Meteor, but it's not a plush and outright comfortable bike either. There are some elements of practicality that are nice, and I think I really like what Royal Enfield has done with the seat setup. It doesn't take too much work to convert it into a single seater or back into a dual seat setup. Then on the other hand, the ground clearance is quite low. At 140 mm, that number sounds scary on paper, and I was really cautious while going over speed breakers for the first few times. But eventually you realize it's not so bad. You do need to be careful. I don't weigh a lot, and I suppose if you have the weight of luggage or a pillion on the back, you'll really need to be careful. But so far, we haven't hit it on anything. At the same time, 140 mm is not really practical on bad roads. So what is this bike all about? I suspect that this motorcycle is going to appeal to the sort of people who love the look, feel and identity of the Super Meteor, but don't want to live with that riding position on our roads. In that respect, this is a much more comfortable and usable bike. But at the same time, it's still a fairly niche machine, and it will not have that widespread appeal of the rest of Royal Enfield's large lineup of bikes. Then again, it's always nice to see a manufacturer try something different, and the more bikes we have out there, the merrier.